This is GovExec Daily, where we bring you the federal stories that really matter. It's June 21st, 2021. I'm Ross John Fortune. Vaccination rates across the U.S. are increasing, and more states are lifting COVID-19 restrictions on businesses and public spaces. As the country approaches President Joe Biden's 70% vaccination rate goal by the 4th of July, the federal government is preparing for a post-pandemic future for civil servants. Earlier this month, the government's Safer Federal Workforce Task Force sent an email to the President's Management Council and agency chiefs of staff with an update on the return to workplace process. The email asked agencies to have plans for both re-entry and post-reentry procedures and policies with a deadline of July 19th. In the same message, the administration said it would be maintaining maximum telework flexibilities to all current telework eligible employees pursuant to direction from agency heads. Maximum telework flexibilities were a major shift for agencies when the Trump administration enacted them in March of 2020. In the 15 months since, agencies have adjusted to telework and have, by most accounts, done an effective job at keeping government operations afloat. The next transition to hybrid will be another adjustment that will have operational and potentially legal ramifications for the 2 million members of the federal civilian workforce. Stephanie Rapp-Tully is a partner and federal employment attorney with Tully Rinckey PLLC's Washington, D.C. office. She'll join me after a short break to discuss hybrid work environments for the civil service and what the new normal will look like for feds.
Are you curious about government modernization? Look no further than the IT Modernization Virtual Summit brought to you by NextGov, Defense One, and Route 50. Tune in on June 30th to dive into the biggest challenges and opportunities in government modernization, including DevOps, app migration, funding, and more. Register today at nextgov.com/events. That's nextgov.com/EVENTS.
The COVID-19 crisis forced the federal government into maximum telework since March of last year. Now, as vaccination rates are on the rise and we approach President Joe Biden's July 4th deadline, the federal government is looking to move more to the new normal of a hybrid work environment. In fact, the White House has asked agencies to have plans for both re-entry and post-re-entry procedures and policies by next month. So what will these next few months look like for federal employees, agencies, and managers? Stephanie Rapp-Tully is a partner and federal employment attorney with Tully Rinckey PLLC's Washington, D.C. office. She joins the show now to discuss hybrid work for feds as the pandemic restrictions recede. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what do the telework options and hybrid work environment options mean for the 2 million feds that are working for the government?
So I think that the process is going to start at the macro level. The administration has announced kind of the general guidelines of where it wants to see in following this hybrid model. It'll then come down to each agency to determine how they want to allow telework in their agency, because it's a permissive document, not necessarily a requirement. So each agency is going to have to ascertain what those hybrid model, the telework, the remote work could look like for their employees. And of course, it's going to vary depending on the needs and the mission of each individual agency. But I think there's going to be a lot of discussion among senior executives in each agency over the next month as to what they can do, what they've learned from the pandemic in terms of employee performance while teleworking, and how this hybrid model will actually, I think, make the government more efficient.
Well, let's sort of expand on that. I realize this is not necessarily a legal question, but what do you think as far as that is concerned? How will the government be more efficient? What have you seen over the last 15 months as far as how the government has continued its operations?
I think the move to becoming electronic, of course, there are limitations. There are certain government agencies that cannot do everything electronically and have to physically be in the office. But there are a number of agencies where that is not necessarily a requirement. And I think the move to having everything be electronic and not necessarily paper-based will make the government more efficient and will allow employees, all over the world, but all over the country, to be able to perform very important functions for the government in whatever location they are at any time, depending on time zones, or even extending into, well, I have all the information right here, I can do this right now. And it'll get us away, I think, from a traditional 9 to 5, 5-day a week, bottoms in the seats model, which I think will actually in the long run be a good thing.
I think, yeah, that we've had a lot of people on the show to sort of talk about this, during the pandemic and how it has increased efficiency and things like that. And there's, as you note, all kinds of full 360 complement of pluses and minuses. But with the efficiency parts of things and the accommodation parts of things are a huge part of that. So to that point, what is going to be the impact of the hybrid model on the reasonable accommodation process?
Yes, I think that is going to be one of the biggest changes, because an agency is going to have a very tough time establishing an undue burden of someone requesting telework as a reasonable accommodation. Before the pandemic, that was pretty common. The agency would say, no, we need to have somebody in their seat and ready for conversations and be a part of meetings. And now, because of the 15-month experiment, essentially, of having to do everything remotely, I think it's going to be a really tough thing for the agency to say that an employee teleworking is going to be an undue burden on the agency. I think that this is going to change how that analysis for a reasonable accommodation is conducted by agencies.
Yeah, the in the private sector, that we've seen a lot of that with regards to the last 15 months, where people are able to it has brought a lot of people into the fold as far as the ability to, if you're caring for loved ones or children or whatever. No one likes the crystal ball. I say this on the show all the time, but do you think this is something that will stick? There are plenty of managers who have decried telework, and movement is difficult in the government, but the last 15 months maybe change that calculus?
I think so. I think this is going to stick. As we move along, I think when employees can demonstrate that they are productive in either a hybrid fashion or even a full-time telework fashion, there's going to be a lack of argument as to why they shouldn't be. Where you're going to see problems is obviously the traditional performance problems. If an employee is not performing while teleworking, that's a whole other story. But for employees that are successful at it and have been successful for the past 15 months, what's the reason to stop it? And therefore, I think you're going to continue to see this for years and years, and really transitioning to putting a lot of work product more in the electronic universe than in physical paper as we go on.
Yeah, having these things standardized certainly, I think, would help a lot of people. We've sort of touched on this a little bit. How do you think this has affected agencies and continuation of operations? Like, for the people that are people who are doing a lot of work over networks and things like that, will that be a benefit going forward? And is this something that sort of employee groups and management will have to negotiate?
Yeah, I think that, again, each agency is going to have to figure out how it can support its mission through telework or hybrid workforces. And then even within agencies, they're going to have to look at it and what is a long-term model. I know that from a litigation standpoint, what I do and interacting a lot with federal agencies, at the beginning of the pandemic, there were a number of agencies that I interacted with that had their hands tied. They could do nothing in terms of moving along in litigation. I think there's been an education in how they could do things more without having to physically be in the office. And so I think that that's only going to continue to better understand it. The EEOC is a great demonstration. Most judges are all remote, and we've conducted, I have at least, and I know the EEOC has done a number of hearings, mediations, and conferences that are all virtual in the same format pretty much that you and I are using right now. So if that is working for certain agencies, it certainly could work permitting security issues for other agencies. And I think that there's going to be an education process on how they can use technology to better support a hybrid model.
Well, to that end, how much is security going to play into that? Specifically when it comes to things like EEOC, MSPB, the kind of anything that involves a judge or, these kind of processes.
Security is a huge factor. There's already been certain agencies can't use certain platforms. There's been certain platforms created specifically just for an agency to use. And myself, outside counsel has to mold to that particular platform. So I think that has actually been a huge conversation over the past 15 months is what are the security implications of using electronic platforms and transmitting information from through electronic means. But I think that there has been developments here and things that are not classified information, that are maybe just sensitive or protected information, I think can be safely handled by electronic means and what these agencies have been able to do throughout the pandemic.
Finally, we'll sort of end on this with the possibility of these return to work situations on the horizon. Is safety a concern, do you think, for both feds and managers?
Absolutely. And this has been kind of a side conversation to this hybrid model, is whether government agencies can require employees to be vaccinated. And the short answer is yes, they can. So I think there's going to be a lot of conversation about safety measures, how to ensure employee and manager safety when people do return to work. If people are not vaccinated, what precautions does everyone need to take in order to ensure that safety? And what agencies are going to actually require of employees in terms of vaccinations and reporting of vaccinations.
Yeah, the documentation of that is sort of becoming a flashpoint in state governments and certainly private businesses as well. But we will all see. I know I keep a picture of my card on my phone, and it's pretty good. I haven't had to flash it to anybody. They just trust me, which maybe is their mistake. But we even did a whole show on my vaccination experience, so at least I'm covered there. I can always just tell them to look me up. But in the meantime. Thanks so much for being on the show with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to GovExec Daily. Our show was produced by Adam Butler and hosted by me, Ross Fortuna. We want to thank Stephanie Rapp-Tully for joining the program. Our music is the song Signals by Catfish Dancing. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or anywhere you get your podcasts. Email us any feedback at podcast@govexec.com or follow us on Twitter @GovExec. We'd love to hear from you. We'll talk to you later.